Hi everyone. So this week's Hope Answer is I can remember what God has done for us. So we're going to hear a little story about how the Israelites remembered what God had done for them. Now we're back in the wilderness with the Israelites and they're stood at a river. Now it's really difficult for all those people to cross a river with no dry ground. So they needed God to help them. And this is how God did it. Now, before we get into the story, you need to remember that the Israelites, God was everywhere, but God wasn't connected with us at that time like he is now. So the Israelites, in order to remember God, carried this huge box called the Ark of the Covenant, or just the Ark. And this box represented God's presence, and everywhere this box went, God's power went with it. Now, the Israelites approached the river with the Ark of the Covenant, and God spoke to Joshua, who was his messenger at the time, to tell them what they had to do. And as we tell the story, we're going to stack little stones, just like they do later in the story, so that we can try and remember it and also remember amazing things about God. So we're in Joshua chapter 3, and we're going to start at verse 10. And it says, "This is how you will know that the living God is among you." So that reminds us that God is always with us. And then we go to verses 13 and 16. It says, "As soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord set foot in the Jordan, which is the river, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand in a heap. The water from upstream stopped flowing, it piled up in a heap a great distance away." So God made a promise and he kept it. He did an amazing miracle. So that's 2 more stones we'll put down here. And then we come to verse 17. And it says, "The priests who carried the ark stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground." So the water stayed away, the ground stayed dry until everyone in Israel passed through. That meant that God was looking out for everyone. So God always cares for each one of us. So I'll put another stone down. And then we go into chapter 4. And in chapter 4, we're going to read from verse 7. And God had told them to set up a monument. And when it came to this monument, it said, "In the future, when your children ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off." And this means we can thank God and tell others for years and years and years about the amazing things that God has done. So that is 2 more stones we can put there. And then we come to verse 8, and it said, "The Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of tribes of Israelites, and they carried them over to their camp where they put them down." So the Israelites did as God commanded them. And so that helps us to remember to always obey God and to do as he asks, because he always knows what's best for us. And then come to verse 10. It said, "Now the priests carrying the ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything the Lord had commanded Joshua was done by the people." And so this helps us to remember that we should always pay attention to what God is doing and what other people are doing with God. So that's some more stones we can add here. Let's see if they'll stack. Ooh. There we are. And then we have verse 18. "And the priests came up out of the river carrying the ark of the covenant of the Lord. No sooner had they set their feet on dry ground than the waters of Jordan returned to their place." So God kept his promise because he's faithful. And then we come to verses 23 and 24. "For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you crossed over. He did this so that all people of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful." So that's a very important thing to remember, is that God is powerful. Now, I'm not sure if the stones will stay up. There we go. Made a nice little monument there. So you don't have to set up stones to remember what God has done, because there's so many things in that story to remember. going to need a lot of stones, aren't we? And God does even more amazing things throughout our life. But there's other ways you can remember what God has done. Maybe you can write things down in a notebook, or just tell your friends about what God has done for you. Draw pictures, sing songs. There's so many ways to remember what God has done, because he's always doing amazing things for us. One thing I like to do is I have a little notebook that's in my room, and whenever God's telling me something, I like to write down in that. Or I like to paint pictures. I love painting, and I love seeing how amazing God's world is. So I paint pictures of mountains and trees to help remind me of how amazing God is. There's a million different ways to remember what God has done for us. But what matters is that we do remember, and we thank God and praise him every day for what he's done for us. And now we're going to do our memory verse, and it is 1 Samuel 12:24. Be sure to fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart. Consider what great things he has done for you. So this is our last week out in the wilderness with our epic adventure. But don't you worry, we'll be back next week with an exciting new series for you. Feel free to spend more time in the wilderness if you so please, because God is always with you. But join us next week for our new adventure. Have a good week, guys.